Good morning, everyone. My name is Bonson Lam. I'm the pricing manager for Ergon Energy Retail. I'm here today just to talk through some of the changes in tariffs and also to really talk a little bit more deeply on the customer survey that Queensland Farmers Federation have done. Really do appreciate the feedback we've got, and definitely everything that's been said will be taken into account in where we want to go in the future. So what I'd like to do is probably go through just some slides to just set the scene a little bit, and then we'll have a look at the questions that we've got from many farmers today. I just probably want to set a context, something that we've been working on for the last few years as we've seen obsolete tariffs expire, and as we go into 2025 and 2030. There's three things themes that I really like to talk about, which is probably explains why tariffs are changing and so forth. A lot of it is the changing landscape we see in Queensland, but also in other states, in how customers are changing the way they use and generate energy, not definitely within the farming sector, but also households and other small businesses. So we're seeing bigger take up of solar PV. What used to be peak hours in the middle of the day, now we've got a lot of solar and renewables. That's actually changing the demand and supply for energy during the middle of the day. We also seeing a slightly increased take up in electric vehicles, batteries, and so forth. So we're working basically from a one-way market where the consumer just uses energy to a two-way market where customers use and export energy, and that has impacted how we've designed tariffs. And speaking about new technology, not just EV, solar, battery, but technology to monitor people's usage, energy efficiency, that does present both opportunities and challenges for customers. And taking those two into account, we have created a number of new tariffs that reflect these two changes and differences in cost drivers. There are obviously, with any change, there are both opportunities and challenges, and I want to walk through both of them so, customers are better informed in making decisions both now and for the future. One thing that I probably really want to focus on is time of use. So many farmers have experience on a time of use tariff, especially those that are previously on the obsolete tariff 62 or 65. Here I'm just probably going through the time of use definitions for tariff 62 and 22L, which is a very similar structure. You can see that's a very long peak period, 14 hours per weekday from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m, mainly reflecting on how peak used to be in the past, where prior to solar, that was when most businesses operated, and that was the peak period at that time. We know that with changes in customer behaviour and technology, the midday period is now off peak as opposed to peak, so that's totally flipped around. And where we're going to is closer to your 22B or 50A definition of a peak, which is 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. That period largely is where solar generation is low or non-existent, and a lot of households use their air conditioning and heating at that time. So the opportunity really for customers and farmers, as we're talking about today, is that the peak period has really shrunk from 14 hours a day to 5 hours a day, and many farmers who do want to use more energy between 7 a.m. and 4 p.m. Previously it's a peak period, now it's off peak, and how do we get customers to understand that. So if that actually makes sense for their operations, then that's an opportunity for them to use power at a lower rate. The other thing that I think came across in the theme of some of the surveys and some of the discussions that I've had with customers is that really the energy management piece it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. So what I mean by that is that there's different pieces that need to go together to give you the whole solution. So today I'm talking mainly about tariffs, and a lot of it is understanding how they work, but that's only one aspect of the jigsaw puzzle. So the other things that are really important for many customers is data and analytics. So in Ergon Energy Retail, we've got a tool called Energy Analysis, which is available free for customers online to see how they're using energy this year, last year, CO2 emissions, if they have a digital meter, or down to half-hour intervals as well. And then the other things that they're probably talking about is how do we leverage technology to help us, whether it's solar, batteries, or something else, or optimizing operations themselves. When do you start and stop pumps and so forth. The fourth thing is it's really about providing feedback, because we need to have that feedback loop to understand what works, what doesn't work. So some of our tariffs have been designed with quite a lot of customer input, so we want to make sure that continues going forwards, because there's no point for us to design a tariff if nobody wants to use it. So we really want to make sure that tariffs are fit for purpose as much as possible, while definitely reflecting the cost signals that the industry bears, so that we have a sustainable future. The last thing to talk about is really to share your wins and your learnings, so the whole community benefits. Ergon Energy Retail is the largest retailer by customer number in regional Queensland. We have our employees in regional Queensland. We are really keen to work in a community point of view, because we need to share both our learnings and our wins in order that other customers who may not be in the survey or other communication channels, they get to learn what's happening. And the other thing that I find is as people share and talk about what they've learned, it sharpens their thinking as well. So definitely do value that as well. What I probably want to talk through, I know I talked a little bit about how time of use have changed from the past to the future, is to really talk through the glide path of where tariffs are going in the future. I did mention in the beginning we're going from long peak periods to shorter peak periods, and as a result of that there are tariffs that either are going or are set as obsolete, because ultimately they're sunset tariffs, for want of a better word. So the tariffs 62A, 65A, 66A, they are available, but they're limited access tariffs, because they reflect time of use periods that are no longer really fit for purpose. We understand customers do value having them, so they're still available in the Gazette. But the longer term future is we need to work with different stakeholders as to where we go with customers on those tariffs. And the other thing, just to really call out, is this year's QCA consultation. They did ask stakeholders as to which tariffs they want to keep, which tariffs they don't want to keep, what works and what doesn't work. So definitely really invite people on this call, as well as stakeholders, to be part of that conversation, so we get feedback as to which of those tariffs you want to keep in the form that you want to keep them. The last three tariffs I pointed here, tariffs 22A, 24 and 41. Appreciate not a lot of farmers are on them, but some are. These tariffs The first two are seasonal tariffs, which are summer, non-summer tariffs. They're actually been made obsolete this year and they'll expire next year. So, we will work with customers on that, but they reflect time of use definitions that no longer make sense going forward. And 41 is at any time demand tariff, which has been made obsolete because it's no longer supported by network and their pricing structures. Where we're going towards in the future is, tariffs that kind of look like the ones on the right. I've talked a little bit about 22B, which does have the shorter peak period. So really, the way that, I've seen network communicate with the energy regulator and with customer forums is that, that's where the future is in the shorter time of use peak tariffs. And the way that they've done the network pricing is that those tariffs will have either a lower increase going forward or have a reduction. So really, I know we don't have a crystal ball as to, what tariffs look like, what the prices look like, next year or 5 years down the track. But we do have some signals from network to say, that's where the focus is for them, is to really encourage customers to take these newer time of use and time of use demand tariffs. The other thing, just probably want to share, I've talked a bit about the likely increases going forward or decrease, obviously depending on what the costs are like in the next few years. Is that just point you to the first part of this slide, which talks about the key tariffs that are available for most small customers in the farming space. Things that probably want to draw out is, yes, as been told earlier, there are increases this year. You can see tariff 20, the usage rate has gone up 12%. And on the other hand, you can see the time of use tariff 22B, the daytime rate's gone up by 2.4 instead of 12%. So you're already seeing some of that pattern where, really a focus on getting customers to use more between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. And, you can see a bit of that price signal there in that 22B, the increase in the daytime period is quite low. During night and during the 4 to 9 peak and the overnight shoulder period, the increases on 22B are similar to tariff 20. I know a lot of farmers are looking into tariff 20. So that's probably one thing to draw out, just, the potentially, quite an attractive rate for daytime for 22B. The other thing is, as 62A, 65A and 66A effectively are sunset tariffs, the increases on them are a bit higher. So, they are quite significantly higher. So definitely the call out really today is for customers on those tariffs, have another look whether they're still right tariff for you. So it may be right in the past, but with these increases, maybe 20 or 22B or 24B could be an option for you. We do know some customers, 62A, 65A is still the most attractive option. That the reason is the supply charge. So I'm just looking at the bottom of the slide. 62A, 65A, they remain, the lowest fixed charge tariffs out of this space, in the small business space. And we do know, 62A in the off-peak tariff, 20 cents is still significantly lower than tariff 20 at 25 cents. So, certain customers may still be better off on 62A, but, the number of customers that are better off on these agricultural tariffs will actually decrease over time. So definitely the suggestion for many farmers is to get ahead of the curve. It's now July. If you put in a tariff change, we can backdate it to your last schedule read, which could be last financial year, and help you avoid some of that price increase.
What would you say to someone who is experiencing a situation where some of your NMIs are coming close or might exceed 100 megawatt hours, but that puts them at a severe disadvantage because it means no more feed-in tariff for the solar, because it means a different suite of charges, and because typically it means for more charges or like higher supply charges? What would be your response to them?
There's two things. One is, the first thing is, can you equalise your usage across different NMIs? So, if you see one NMI getting towards 105 megawatt hours per year, then can you redistribute some of the usage to another NMI? Because some customers have multiple NMIs that are in the same property. So one thing is to redistribute. Secondly is, if they can't avoid that reclassification, they can't redistribute, that's, that NIMI is going to be 150 or 200 megawatt hours, then how do you actually make a large tariff work for you? So a lot of the large tariffs revolve around maximum demand. So there is a lower usage rate compared to the small tariffs, but effectively they've unbundled the tariff to a usage component and a demand component. And the demand component's about your maximum 30 minutes during the month. So effectively, that's kind of your cap. The way large tariffs work is it tends to reward customers that are not very peaky in their demand. So if you've got a constant level of usage all the time, for some customers, a large tariff can actually work okay, because you're paying effectively a 14-cent tariff instead of 25 cents or 20 cents. So how do you optimize your operations so you're not having those spikes, but just having a reasonably constant load?
Because you can't do a lot about watering, the crop needs the water when it needs water, that you do have this very peaky use that you can't really, like an industry could, you can't really get rid of a lot of those peaks if it is just one or two large pumps on the 1 metre. And so some people were saying, should I install a second NMI? But then that's
additional cost to set it up. Yep.
To set it up. How would that? What would be your recommendation to them, given the fact that it almost has to be peaky and that they don't have a lot of control over, like when it's used?
And I know some of the solutions I talk about will work for some customers and not others. So for some customers, having a control load tariff works in the sense that there's no demand charge on a control load. So I think that obviously the risk of control load is we don't know exactly when it's turned off. It's minimum 18 hours a day. So firstly the question is, if there is an event and if there's an outage at the same time, which could happen, what does it look like if you use it for 18 hours? Is that going to be a problem or not? So it's kind of that trade-off between having a lower bill but potentially less pumping. The other thing is really, if our current tariff suite for demand tariffs don't work, then come to us with what you think is a viable solution. So at the moment, we know the network is planning for 2025, 2030. Anything is up for discussion. And the energy regulator have mentioned to network bodies to work with either the customer councils and the different stakeholder groups and as to what is a new tariff that actually could help in that situation. Is it a non-demand charge tariff? So we've got at the moment a tariff called Tariff 43, which doesn't have a demand charge for large customers, but the rules on that are quite restrictive as to who can go on it. So it does not work for most customers. It only works for certain customers who are effectively in a legacy situation. So, I think this is probably a good time to have that debate to work through, if you need a different tariff, what does that look like? And have that conversation with the regulator or the network body as they engage for 2025. Go through the customer councils, and then let's get some, ideas on the table. We definitely understand, the current tariffs may not suit everyone, but, here's an opportunity to provide some input, and definitely, the feedback that we've got from the surveys is definitely some information that we can use for that. I think that's been discussed with government a few times. So the current position is that there's no change, but there's, and I appreciate a lot of peak bodies have already mentioned it in the QCA submissions and so forth. And so my encouragement is to keep asking and explaining why it's important. So so it's up to the regulatory authorities to decide, and that's one way of doing it. I think the other thing that it's a bit of a struggle here is that in regional Queensland, the smaller customers, so less than 100, their prices are effectively equalised with Southeast Queensland, while the large customers, they're equalised to East Zone in Ergon under the QCA pricing. So because effectively it's a smaller offset for large customers, you make that delta between small and large tariffs higher than they really should be. It's not so much that the large tariffs are too high. I suppose that's a little bit subjective. It's just that small tariffs, because they've got a bigger offset, you really see that jump as the customer moves from small to large. Well, I mean, other states, they may have, obviously different policies in relation to, pricing.
Yeah.
If there's one-off event, yes, you can put in the submission to say, it was a one-off event, can you please hold off the reclassification? The network reclassification team, there's a dedicated team in network that looks after it. If that meets that criteria, then they'll leave the classification down to small, and then at agreed period, usually 6 months, they'll revisit it. And so if, in 6 months' time that one-off event has proven to be one-off and therefore the customer can remain small, then it'll continue to remain small. But if at the 6-month anniversary, actually that one-off is more of a permanent increase, then that customer will go to large. So that's basically how that works. If there are other things that the customer has done and they can explain why they should be going back to small, like if they have put in solar and there's a permanent decrease in grid usage, or they have a change of use. So often a lot of customers, they move into a large site and their usage pattern's totally different to the previous customer. So as long as they explain that kind of information, then that will be considered for the reclassification down to small. So, the way reclassifications work is they work on 12-month anniversary. So each customer has a date in the network system, and on that 12-month, they look at your last 12 months, are you large and small, and then they go from it. But you can pretty much fast track that process to say, actually something has happened in the meantime that necessitates an earlier reclass to small, then just put that submission in, and then the network team will assess that.
What would you say if you've got people who appreciate that but feel like 12 months can be even too short, just in terms of drought versus flood cycles, or is there any aside from the written submission, is there any other flexibility? For instance, if you were to have 2 years over 100, but then otherwise below, is there any other flexibility there?
Not in the current rules. So the current rules is 12 months. So that's seen as a balance between too short and too long. I suppose you could take one view, which is, why don't we do it over 2 years, which is, one approach. And then I suppose the risk of 2 years is, you could be sitting on large for 2 years when, you could be reclassed down to small earlier. The other thing is to take it to the other extreme, and you might even do it monthly, but then that doesn't work for a seasonal customer because it's all up and down. So what's the right balance between too short and too long? But obviously if there's a suggestion to make it fairer, for want of a better word, then definitely put that input in. I think ultimately the network, they have to apply some rules that they've been told in relation to reclassification is 12 months. So if that feedback comes in and says, it should be 2 years, then the network will need to probably submit that change to whoever needs to sign that off and have that approved. So, I suppose I'm just speaking from, what I know from network. Appreciate they're not here to answer that question, but that's, basically from what I know of the process.
So I think if you're close to or a bit over 100 megawatt hours a year as a user, it's probably more important than ever to monitor your consumption as often as you can, whether that's regularly reviewing your bills, using the Ergon energy analysis tool, or even a spreadsheet if you've got multiple NMIs. Because there are things you can do. There's efficiency. We've got some great case studies on the Energy Savers website about farms that have reduced their consumption and been reclassified back down as a small user with pump upgrades, variable speed drives, changes to irrigation systems, and adding solar. And as Bonson said, so if you are doing those things, you can either stay under the threshold or be reclassified back under it if you just pop over it for some reason.
When you see the bill, you can see on the bottom left-hand side, page 1, it gives you what your daily usage is, which you can annualise. Appreciate for a seasonal customer that doesn't work, but for somebody who uses constantly, like a dairy farmer, that might be some help. We also have bar graphs on the front page that tells you what your last 3 months of usage is, and same time last year, which again will help. But ideally, what you really need is effectively a rolling 12-month spreadsheet. That's probably the best way to figure out whether you're at risk of being reclassed. So the idea is forewarned is forearmed, really.
Yes.
So it's not just going to happen and it's a surprise. It's kind of like if you're trending that way, you're probably going to expect a letter from Ergon. Sooner or later that's going to happen, and so when that does happen, you will be notified that it's effectively you've got about 2 weeks to 4 weeks, depending when you get a letter or email, whether you want to appeal that decision or prepare for it. So there are things that happen that leads to that reclassification.
And as well as the tariff change, there's also, as a large customer, you don't get a feed-in tariff.
Correct, which is a bit of a double blow. Appreciate that's the current regulations on solar is that only small customers get the regional fit, but that's definitely part of the equation in working out what you need to do. The compensation arrangement is called ETAS. It's basically a government-funded scheme for customers coming off obsolete tariffs. So that was done when the obsolete tariffs expired in 2021. What we've done is we've looked back 3 years of usage, so we understand customers can vary from year to year, and we did the calculation of that. We also had a 6-month period for customers to contact us or appeal or give us additional circumstances that we may not be aware of to consider them. So during that time, we've worked with peak bodies and got the ideas as to what else we need to look at. So through that 6 months, we were able to add a few additional NMIs that weren't initially eligible. So that reassessment period ended December last year. So I'm not sure, obviously, whether this customer was able to be reassessed. More than happy if that customer wants to send their NMI to myself. I'm happy to look at it. But basically, we've addressed all the concerns that peak bodies had about, what if you were large or small? What does that mean for eligibility for ETAS? And we've taken that into account.
And does compensation change or cease if you're reclassified during that period?
No. So we have large customers that are eligible for ETAS. We had small customers who are eligible for ETAS as well. And so once ETAS has been, once you're deemed eligible for ETAS, effectively we set up a up to 9-year payment schedule, which decreases each year over time, like a sliding scale. And so the idea behind it is that obviously the customers can do what they like with the rebate, which is applied to the bill. They can either use it to offset their costs, or they can use it to more energy efficiency investments. So the idea is that once ETAS ends, which it does, and in some customers it ends at year 2, and some customers it ends at year 9, because once your ETAS payments drops below $500 in year 2, you lose ETAS totally. Is that once ETAS finishes for that particular NMI, then you would have made the investment or adjustment required to manage the cost reflective bills.
And if you were to change from a small to a large, or vice versa?
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't answer that question. Yeah. So if you go from small to large, you still get paid the same ETAS. So say if your ETAS is $500 this financial year, there's actually going to be a letter or email sent to eligible customers shortly saying, this is what your payment schedule is. So if you get $500 in year 2, you get reclassed from small to large in year 2, which is this year, you still get the $500. The idea is that the amount is fixed regardless of price increases, decreases, small, large, what tariff you're on, except the 62, 65, 66As. That amount is fixed so that you can make decisions off it, regardless of your classification. It also works the other way, because if you've made a huge amount of re-engineering or investments into your business, and you've saved a lot of money, you still get that $500. You're not penalised by having a lower bill either. So it works both ways. Yeah. So let's just say hypothetically, if you are eligible 65A, which you're not if you're large, but if you were, currently the way the rates are working is that your night rate is 25 cents, which is almost as high as your tariff 20. So the way that the tariff reform process is working is that 65A is probably not that great in the currently in the future anyway. And so, for a customer that, wanting to be on 65A, really the other option would be either 22B, which the night rate is, 24.6, is a touch lower than 65A, or even better if they go into 24B, which is a demand tariff, but if you actually use outside 9 p.m, after 9 p.m, which is a night period, till the next morning, you're paying 21 cents, which is a reasonable reduction compared to, under tariff 20 or 65A. So that's the first thing is to really look at some of the new tariffs whether it makes sense. And, perhaps, 21 cents at tariff 24B, or 19 cents if you're on tariff 34, which is a control load tariff, which, both available after 9. I mean, tariff 34 could be out at 9 p.m, but, usually isn't. They could be options. The other thing is, yes, it's true that, tariff 65A is not available for large customers. And if, based on the feedback from farmers and the evidence that the farmers have got, that maybe there should be some kind of 65 equivalent for large, then come in and give us your suggestions on how that would work.
I mean, to be honest, I think that particular issue wasn't so much tariff 65 and 62 in its current form, but the almost progression to make those tariffs less attractive, basically. So, like, I think they lamented the tariff 62 of several years ago, where there was quite a reasonable discount at night.
Yes.
And they felt that the tariff changes pushing people away from them was driving inefficiencies.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying. I mean, tariff 62 used to be around 16 cents, so that was quite an attractive rate. And I suppose the environment a few years ago is very different to the environment in 2022, where both from a network cost point of view, the wholesale costs which have gone up with coal and natural gas, so that we've got a slightly different scenario. The other thing is that we know 62, 65, 66A is how we used to operate in the peak off peak definitions, and what we want to do is get customers to really consider some of the new time of use tariffs, which is your 22Bs, 24Bs. Appreciate the night rate is probably is not 16 cents. I don't know if we'll go back to 16 cents. I suppose we don't have a crystal ball, but they do have a lower night structure than their peak structure. So there is something there. I appreciate it's probably not everything that customers are looking for, but we're trying to address having a reasonable and sustainable night tariff that way, and appreciate customers who don't have a digital meter, they may not be able to exactly model how much their tariff 22B bill is, but if you have a 30 kilowatt pump and it pumps out 30 kilowatt hours every hour, there's some things you could do from ground up to model how much you're going to use at night and therefore how much the cost is. So that's probably the other thing that I'll encourage. I'm sure a lot of farmers do that already, is to really understand, based on the nameplate capacity of their pumps or their fridges or whatever equipment they've got, what their likely usage is. One of the things that I'll suggest is I might just focus on 50A, which is a large time of use demand tariff. So basically, we talk about the large demand draw when the pump is starting, and I don't know whether a customer can start their pump before 4 p.m. or after 9 p.m. So if you can do that, say you start your pump at 2 p.m. By the time you down at 4 p.m. you've got a variable speed drive. Your demand's probably drop a lot lower from your startup. The beauty of Tariff 50A is during the off-peak periods there is a demand charge, but it's a lot lower than the peak charge, so that could be a consideration. So one of the customers that I worked with during the drought process, they were in a similar situation to that, but they were able to change the start times to be outside the 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. period, and was able to save a significant amount of money there. So that's something to look at. We do know Tariff 50A has a very high supply charge, and that is inhibiting a lot of customers from taking it up. So again, probably that's feedback into 2025. Again, do we need to revisit Tariff 50A so it's more attractive to the lower end of the large customer range as well. So we know 50A is not perfect, but I think it's a step in the right direction, and it does work for certain customers who can start their pump outside the 9 to 4 p.m. period.
And then what about people who are small customers on that particular meter, because even if it's a 110 kilowatt pump, if it is only run for 10 days continuously, they won't actually crack the 100 megawatt.
In that case, they can go to Tariff 24B, which is the small equivalent of 50A. Same principle. It's the equivalent in small space. And a much lower supply charge. So supply charge is not an issue of 24B. It is a problem with 50A for some customers.
Can I just ask a question on that peak half hour? Is that based on, for that direct online startup current, which
is it instantaneous?
For a few seconds, yeah. But is it averaged over that highest half hour? So if that might be 200 kilowatts to start a 100 kilowatt pump for 30 seconds or so, and then it stabilises back down to 100. So is that kind of averaged at just over 100, or is it's not that?
Average is probably the simple answer.
Yeah.
So, and I can't remember that got referred to in the webinar or not, but basically the meter does a read on the hour and the half hour. So, and it does it on a kilowatt hour basis. So if on the hour you've got a reading of 0, and then on the half hour you've got a reading of 30, then to calculate 30 kilowatt hours, so you use 30 kilowatt hours over half an hour, then to convert it to an hourly demand calculation, we times 30 by 2, so your maximum demand for that half hour is 60. So you could have a 100 kilowatt pump, but because of that spike and it goes down, you might only use 30, which times by 2 is 60. So 60 is a lot lower than 100.
Yeah.
It's probably the answer to that question. Yeah. So, it's not on instantaneous demand, it's based on readings on half hour, on the hour and every half hour. And it depends how long your startup spike is. If your startup spike is full 30 minutes, so you're going hardcore for the 30 minutes, then maybe, one option is to start your machinery on 15 minutes past the hour, so you're effectively dividing your demand over 2 half hours. Yeah. I know it sounds like a trick, but it's not a trick. This is just how the rules work. Yeah. So, use it to your advantage while, you can, is kind of what I suggest.
Yeah.
I suppose my suggestion to them is have a plan now. And for some customers, it might even make sense to execute on that plan now. So obviously, it's not great to be caught out, for want of a better word. You got a revocation and suddenly you have to make all these changes straight away. It's a bit like, if there's a bushfire or a flood, you have a plan in place. So I know a lot of drought customers are on 66A. You've got 66A is great because you can pump any time at any time rate of 24 cents. You don't have to worry about day or night. But if in a normal situation, a customer pumps at night anyway, and they're able to pump, outside the 4 to 9 period, then why don't they get on, 24B now? Because, that even with a drought situation, they still have to pay for the usage charge. So instead of paying 24 cents on 66A, they could move to 24B and pay 21 cents or Tariff 34 and pay 19 cents. So don't. My suggestion, and again, customers will make their own assessments, is that, if in a normal situation you can work with 24B or 34, make that change now, or start doing the research as to how to make that happen. So, with Tariff 34, I know you need an electrician to come in. There's a few things that happens. It doesn't happen overnight. It could take, weeks or months. So have that plan now. Talk to the electricians now, or talk to your neighbour who's got Tariff 34. What was your experience? So that, by the time revocation does happen, you already changed your tariff, or you're already halfway down that journey. So, you still feel that sense of control, that, you're controlling your destiny to some extent. I don't know too much of the detail. Basically, what a customer needs to do is to sign the declarations, and one of the clauses is that. So, as long as the customer believes they're compliant with the scheme, they sign it, we'll process it. So we don't try and second guess whether the customer has water or doesn't, or has met the obligations or not. So once the form is in, it's signed, it's completed, properly, we will just process it. So, I understand that there may be questions about, am I really eligible or not? So, you can either call in, our call centre's more than happy to help you, or there's also the regulations on the department's website which talks about this. So use that information to help you make that decision. Really, that's all I could probably say to that. And that the other option is, if you're either too busy or you rather have the industry body talk on your behalf, just send them your scenario, and maybe the peak body can talk directly with Ergon or with the department and work that out. If that's a better way, but that's an option. The other thing probably in relation to drought is any customer can apply for individual declaration. So even if your LGA is revoked, but you think based on your individual circumstances that you think that a drought waiver should still be applied for your NMI, you can apply for it as an individual declaration. So there are some sites, very small number, who've got individual declarations. So I suppose the legislation is trying to have that flexibility to cater for that as well. Because whole LGA is a huge area. It's hard to cover every single circumstance. Yeah, so we've run a trial where Network trialled a SMS system. So that actually worked. We know that SMS system's not scalable, so they haven't rolled it out further. So, but that notification is either exactly when it happens or almost within half an hour when it happens. So it's not a lot of notice. It is probably to explain that, but customers do value that notification, because then they can say, oh, actually I've only pumped this field for 10 hours, I need to do 2 hours more. When the outage is over, I pump for another 2 hours. So that is definitely useful. And just because area A is turned off doesn't mean area B is turned off. So they operate on what they call a dynamic control system. So only when that local feeder needs to be turned off, then they turn it off. And generally it gets turned off last. So, tariff 33 gets turned off first, then tariff 34. So I know some people have asked questions about, what's the history of outages in the area. So again, send that information across, and the relevant person in network should be able to assist. So we do know that the QCA had some questions about it, and network has sent historical outage periods. So during the trial, it was only turned off for around 10 to 12 times during the year, so not a huge period. We know historically sometimes an outage is coincident with a hot weather event, 40 degrees and so forth, but it's not always the case. So, there's some bits, from history that you can pull from to give you an idea what the future is, but, history is not always the same as the future is kind of what Network has said all along in relation to outage patterns. What we've also done with certain peak bodies is to do webinars and Q&As for that particular peak body. It could be a regional peak body in Mackay or Toowoomba, so maybe that might be relevant in that situation.
The notification procedure, you said it isn't going to be scaled, so that means, is it true to say in the short term or medium term that you're not going to have any warning really about when it will be turned off?
Yes, correct. So the current setup is there's no advance warning. What customers can do is, if they've got a PowerPoint on the same NMI, is there's a little device you can pay. I can't remember, it's about $100 or $200. You actually plug it in. When there's an outage, you'll send an SMS to your phone. So, your farm might be 5 kilometres away, it'll send you an SMS, and then when it's turned off, when it's turned on. So that's a way of, minimising the mystery as to outage times, and then you can start keeping a log of it. Definitely long term, there may be a solution where, there is a SMS service, but there's no date announced for that as well. So if a customer's keen to go on it now and, needs that kind of alert, then that's one way of doing it. I'm happy to send you the links to that site if people are interested in that alert outage equipment. Again, we don't endorse it. It's a third-party software, but you just literally plug it into the wall, so it's really easy to operate. Send that information across. We might be able to work through with our, the network team. They may know someone there. We have obviously relationships with master electricians and so forth. So that's definitely solvable. If the issue is the electricians are not confident about how it works, we can definitely get a solution.
Hi, I'm Andrew Chamberlain, and I'm at Queensland Farmers Federation. I'm Project Manager Energy, which means I look after a few of the energy efficiency, demand management, microgrid, and energy innovation type projects we run at QFF. Yeah, I think there's some farms that prefer to water at night, and going back to when there was a real difference between peak and off-peak, when 10 years ago when they were trying to manage different issues in the supply system. So people developed irrigation habits and routines around nighttime irrigation. And that was partly because it was driven by much lower costs overnight. Whereas what we're seeing with the network pricing now is they're more interested in the peak flow of electricity through the network and managing electricity consumption and demand away from those times. So they're finding that even in rural areas, there's a strong evening peak between that 4 p.m, 9 p.m. time, when typically people come home and use those things that they use at home in the evening, like ovens and TVs and air conditioners and things. And that we're seeing a flow through in the network there, where they're trying to manage people's consumption away from that time by pricing those periods high as a peak period. So there's been that change. So some farmers prefer to irrigate at night for the reasons that were given. Was lower winds, typically, so better uniformity of irrigation, and also less evaporation. But also there are some farmers that prefer to irrigate during the day because they can't leave moisture on leaves overnight for various reasons too. So yeah, there's a few different things that they're trying to manage. I think one of the things, it may not feel like an immediate fix for people, but if they do keep telling us those stories, then we can, either at QFF or through their own industry bodies, the local irrigator groups, we can take those stories and feed them back to government and to Ergon and to the Queensland Competition Authority to help design more suitable tariffs for more people. Because that's a reality. That flood harvesting is a reality, and so is some very seasonal irrigation systems, and we're trying to work with them to improve those kind of systems. But those couple of bits of advice from Ergon, from Bonson were good around, at least start the pump outside that peak time. So if there's a higher startup current, that doesn't happen in the peak time. There's a few things that you can do a little bit, but I mean, fundamentally, that's a challenge, and we're constantly working with Ergon and the state government to mention that. And that's something that we regularly bring up with them, that category of irrigators that are in that bucket, that they feel like there's not much to do. We don't really want them to go off the network onto diesel. But I mean, some are making that choice for that cost reason. It's got a fairly short history in agriculture. It's tended to be used as a domestic tariff for people who use pool pumps and hot water systems to manage the cost of those and run them overnight. It came up through, as an agricultural thing, through our regular discussions between us and Ergon between QFF and Ergon and the state government. And we saw it as an opportunity to manage genuine peaks so that people can irrigate and not necessarily have a demand charge, but it just turns off when there's a genuine network constraint issue. So it does give people an option to pay that lower rate, and the trade-off is that they may lose power at times. It doesn't always happen. Like Bonson said, there's a fairly low number of actual turn-off events. But if you've got systems that are able to either notify you that they've gone off and the power's come back on so that you can go back out and switch the pump on if you need to, or if you have automated systems that are able to just seamlessly turn back on when the power's back available, they're quite workable tariffs, and we've got people that are successfully using them. But you just do need to really think about the impact for each and every NIMI that you're considering it for. What is the impact? I could lose power without notice for a couple of hours, and how would that affect my operation? And am I prepared to accept that for the lower price? So if you've got a flood irrigation system, you may be midway through a cycle and it switches off, and if you don't have some sort of notification system, it may not turn, and you don't have an automation switch, it may not turn back on, and you might find that you go back out in the morning and it's been turned off, and you might have lost an evening's irrigation. So you need to think through all of those possibilities before signing up. The other thing is Ergon are pretty happy to work with people and give them some indication of what the history of the switch-offs has been in the area, but it's not always a good indication of what's going to happen in the future. But yeah, there's people that are using it successfully. It depends on a few things. Like you could either go to a full, you could either just go to a device like Bonson's mentioned that just physically alerts you when it's off and back on, and then you might either go down there yourself and turn it back on manually, which I think he said is a couple $100. But then you go to a full automated system, which would just turn the power back onto the pump and start it back up when the power is available. And I'm not sure what that is. I think you just need to, if you're close to that 100 megawatt hour per year or over it, I think you need to monitor your energy consumption closely throughout the year. And if you can reduce, if you look like you're going to be over, if you can take steps to reduce that through some sort of practice change, fantastic. Or you might consider some sort of investment in efficiency or demand management, so irrigation system upgrade or pump upgrade, or even adding solar to keep yourself well below that 100 megawatt hours a year. And then once you're into that category and you get the notice from Ergon, if you make a firm step to reduce, like as Bonson said, you might put a new pump in or new solar, and they might be able to determine fairly quickly from there that you will be a small user, so they can reclassify you straight away within that 6 months. But if otherwise, they may need to look at another 4 years' bills before they'll see that come down. But I mean, it's a real area, it's a real opportunity area for farms, I guess, that are in that sort of 90 to 150 megawatt hour per year range, where we've seen through our energy audits that farms have successfully got themselves back down under that threshold through a combination of efficiency measures and solar. So we've got a lot of case studies and some good blog pieces on the 5 things you can do to reduce your irrigation energy use on our website. So I'd really encourage people to have a look at that and talk to us if they want some more advice. The other thing is that you do lose that feed-in tariff. So as well as changing onto a large user tariff, you lose that feed-in tariff. So if you're a seasonal irrigator, so you only use your pumps for 3 months or less throughout the year, but you have a solar system there that's feeding back into the grid, even at 6 cents throughout the rest of the year, it does help take the edge off that bill. Once you creep over 100 megawatt hours a year, you don't get that feed-in tariff anymore. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye on those ones that are close to 100 and looking for ways that you can keep yourself under that threshold. The QFF's been asking the state government to look at lifting that threshold and having ongoing conversations with them about it. Yeah, good question. So I think it means that people have, rather than a range of retailers with maybe a small number of tariffs each on offer, where they might have to get on a few different websites or look at Energy Made Easy, for example, and consider a whole range of offers from a lot of providers. Customers in Queensland, regional Queensland, have one retailer, and all those tariffs are contained within that one retailer. So I guess theoretically it should make the job easier. Probably shouldn't say that, but people are able to liaise with one retailer and who can see their data and help them make a choice about the third tariff. And there is the price equalisation policy in Queensland, which means that people who live in regional areas are paying approximately the price of their East Coast colleagues. So that should help them overcome those costs of supplying power in those regional areas. And I'm not sure what that would look like if we went to full retail competition in some of those regional parts of Queensland. But I guess the thing is, there's just been a huge growth in technological advancement in energy, both in efficiency, in generation, and in monitoring and control systems, and in market mechanisms. So there's all of these new models that are potentially and will become available to people that will help them navigate using electricity. Things like peer-to-peer trading, microgrids, embedded networks, and all those kind of things. And we're just looking at ways and working on projects now that we can prove up these models and these technologies to hopefully help farms over time be able to collaborate and use energy more efficiently across a number of farms or across a number of NMIs at the same time. And that's another thing we're working with Ergon and the Queensland government and even the federal government on. What do the energy markets of the future look like, and how can users and generators of energy interact with each other to improve efficiency and productivity. I guess people need to think about what the long-term solution is. At the moment the price of diesel is as high as it's ever been, and I don't know what is going to happen with that. I can certainly understand from a cost point of view people wanting to weigh all those options up, because you've got emissions, you've got the thing is, if you've got a good amount of customers on the network that are encouraged to stay on the network and share power, so that you're using power at the same time as your neighbour's generating it. There's no reason with some of these new models and technologies that we can't end up with a system that utilises power more effectively and more cost effectively to increase productivity. but it's kind of hard to convince a farmer at the moment who's trying to weigh that up, what to do in the long term, because diesel and gas prices are both high, and we've seen how volatile they can be to global pressures, and same with electricity with prices coming back up again. So it is difficult to really advise someone. And you've got all that other handling side of diesel too. Like you've got to have a fuel tank there, deliver fuel to the pump, keep it topped up. You've got to have it bunded. There's a whole lot of management around diesel as well that you don't have for electricity. I just think once maybe the price of batteries comes down a bit more, once there's some more electric vehicles on the market and some possibly even a bit more use of hydrogen and market mechanisms that allow people to share power, then those people that are using pumps for a short amount of time might be able to just use their power from a solar array around the corner or down the road, so it won't be such a big issue. But and for those that are putting solar systems in, there'll be other devices that'll be able to utilise that power at times at the moment where it's just being exported at a low rate. So they might be able to charge batteries or produce hydrogen for fertiliser, or there's all of these other technologies that are becoming available that might mean you get a lot better utilisation and better long-term pricing out of some of those new technologies. I sort of genuinely think that the electricity network's a good piece of infrastructure, and if we can just get it right, we can. If we can just quickly adapt to these new technologies and everything, then people will be able to utilise it better, which will help long-term prices, I think, come down more importantly. Well, it's a good question because we're in this review period now where Ergon goes to the regulator in a couple of months' time and starts talking about their forward pricing for the next regulatory period. So it's a good opportunity now to talk about some of these new tariffs like netting off. So if you can net off solar from one of your accounts onto another account where you're using a pump or a cold room, it might be a good time to start having some of those discussions, which will mean that some of those big pumps that are only used a couple of weeks of the year might be able to get netted off against some solar that the farm might have on the shed. Equally, that kind of thing would suit places like where there's horticulture or sugarcane, where paddock space is a premium, but there's a big shed roof just around the corner on another NMI, so the farms might be able to produce power on the shed and power the pumps nearby by netting off power. So I think there's possibility over the next couple of years to really start pushing some of these new tariffs, to kind of add diversity to the tariffs that are there now and reflect what people want to do with their solar power and batteries and things like that. Because it just seems there's answers there that aren't necessarily behind the meter, and by that I mean the answer to everything isn't just solar and batteries behind the meter. It might be more of a shared power system, whether it's through an organised microgrid or a virtual power plant, or just allowing customers to net their power off in real time across their accounts.